So
All
today
right.
we're going to hear something interesting, unusual. Yeah, go ahead. Introduce the topic and everything. Sorry. No.
Yeah, no worries. So after talking with Sergey for at least earlier this week, and I had a couple of different ideas for papers that are interesting. The first being this paper from March, Sparks of Intelligent or General Intelligence from Microsoft. This was right after Microsoft announced that they were going to be uh, investing $10 billion into OpenAI, specifically for ChatGPT models going forward. And this is their first evidence on what they claim to be artificial general intelligence, which is a buzzword that it's been around since the 60s, but seems to stem a lot of AI winters when initially introduced in a large capacity. So it's interesting that they end up using this as a press release for their investment, more as like a justification in my mind. What I apologize about is the amount of reading I gave everybody. If you actually did go and look at the articles, I think it's somewhere 200 pages plus between the three articles. So, if anything, I hope to at least give more of a high level overview, as most to all of these theories are speculative. And so it is just interesting to see a couple different perspectives, especially previous presentations that I've given on theory of consciousness. The second two papers are really more on different perspectives concerning theories of consciousness. I'll go into sort of the model differences that they more or less employ, and then thinking about why are we so animal-centric potentially in consciousness. Maybe plants actually do have a form of consciousness, or maybe it's semantic. But that's sort of my goals here. I did not, unfortunately, get to look at the documentary. Maybe we still do this as a video night or a movie night or something. But
Yeah, movie night. We should do it, absolutely.
yeah, I put it there. If people did watch it, would be happy to hear about the debate or different things. But in terms of general overview of this presentation, I want to review a couple of the theories of consciousness, two of them in particular, as they pertain to a couple of these theories. Give you reasons why we care about LLMs. I'm sure you all do and know, but just nice for full completeness of the presentation. Go through the Sparks of AGI, some of their experiments, go through some of the researchers thinking about theoretical computer science. We'll talk about plants and then discussion. So really thinking about what is the theory of consciousness again. There are four essential ideas that at least a review went over about a year and a half ago. I know all of these theories have been advanced, but the general framework, at least for this working theory, is the global workspace theory, as is originally a backboard or blackboard for intelligence, where it was proposed that mental states are globally available to a wide range of cognitive processes. So that means that these mental states can help with attention, evaluation, memory, and verbal report. And so it is a wide, accessible information, as the global workspace is then going to have some initiation that needs a specific task to be completed, which is then coordination of each of these different nodes or modules or local processors. And so it is also called global neural workspace theory, where it's more of a broadcasting system utilizing different workers for cognition. Great. In contrast, though, the integrated information theory is very different, as it's more taking a mathematical approach to the potential rise of consciousness. So it starts by positing axioms about the phenomenological characteristic of the conscious experience. So is there some kind of cause and effect power? Is there a really intrinsic way of mapping sort of these a prioris to the posterior, or like a hot zone? So is it more of a collection of mutual processes that are then forming the downstream effects? It's integrated information. So as the processes continue to go down the line, it's integrating and refining more of the process that it's going to. So rather than pooling a bunch of different processes that might give rise to fine-grained action like attention, visualization, motion, it is iteratively going down the line where it doesn't necessarily know the intended goal at the end. It links consciousness specifically with posterior cortical areas. They call it the hot zone back here, but this does not refer, looking at my notes. It is this state, the IIT, also is responsible for looking at global states and local states of consciousness, trying to do different scales of integration. There are different posits there, but looking at the evaluation of all, these were the previous four. Specifically, we're looking at the inner two. The other two are slightly mentioned, but not important for this discussion. They have, a lot of these theories do have some form of evidence, be it more speculative than actual hard and proven evidence, as testing these theories are very difficult, especially in toy examples. But there are benefits to each. With that being said, more so, the theory of computer science consciousness tends to follow the global workspace theory, whereas theory of plants and non-animal centric theories of consciousness tend to follow an integration theory. That being said, you are welcome to go check out the previous talk. I go into these a lot deeper. But moving on, just for time's sake, we know LLMs are now a large part of the zeitgeist, large part of the research. Many of you are studying this, but history of ChatGPT up until I gave this in early March, late February. So there's a lot of new advancements that I don't have here, but just to give you an idea of what is interesting, why we need to start thinking about ChatGPT. What it is interesting that I didn't update here is that the users on ChatGPT have been declining month over month, which is actually kind of alarming to Microsoft, but they hope to see a rise as students enter school again and start using it for homework help. And they actually posit that it's going to rise again just because people are going back to school. What does ChatGPT actually do? Sparks of AGI. The following are going to be a bunch of different examples. The authors demonstrate novel and difficult tasks by asking questions to ChatGPT-4. However, they do state that this is all speculative observation, as many of these things were not tested on other LLMs. They're trying to specifically use ChatGPT-4 as ways to demonstrate sort of this idea of a global workspace model or reasoning and whatnot. So each of these, I think I have a series of 12 different examples, but this specific vision example is not asking DALL-E 2 to perform an image in a diffusion model, but rather code something to make an image. And so they are able to make first steps to give remarks and give an example of, hey, draw a cat. It's able to draw these shapes and give relative spatial identification to each of these figures, like the dog has ears, nose, and legs. However, you can start to see that it simply memorizes the code when drawing a cat and a dog, but when you prompt it to do a further task, like add pants or a shirt, it did not understand the task at first, but was able to modify it over time. So for here, to give an example, it's able to refine after 3 different prompts by trying to give the stick figure shirt and pants. Does it actually give sleeves? No. But it does start to give some semblance in abstract form. And this is all done with just code. What was that? I missed that.
I said you need sleeves for consciousness. It was a joke.
Yeah. Another thing that kind of impressed me, but also is a deterrent, is ChatGPT-4 can understand music, but not musical harmony. Specifically, they had a model produce ABC notation. It was able to reproduce some of the most popular tunes, but was not able to harmonize with the tunes itself. It does very well in many coding examples. I know probably many of us have used it for coding help, but it is able to explain the coding execution and sort of the directions and instructions that maybe work more in natural language rather than just sort of a white page or iterative approach. According to this team, it's not perfect yet, as they say in quotes and italices, but it certainly does better than the average softwares they claim, showing examples on coding tests that I don't show here, but it does do a fairly good job on simpler problems. Can it integrate into a whole system of code? No, it would need to ingest all of that information, but it arguably is not trying to do that if you give it a correct enough prompt. We're still going to be editing. The team then infers that ChatGPT-4 is consistently better at mathematics than previous models, but it is still not refined past an Algebra 2 calculus level. It can do some forms of linear algebra, except when you start to get more pictorial in nature, it starts to struggle. And looking at some of their examples in section 3, if you have time, the math is fine, but it definitely is struggling to interpret some of the more heavily used symbolic math representations. Continuing, how does it interact with the world? So it is just not trained, or is
about the music. There is a nice YouTube video where somebody played with Bach music in the notation, like textual notation with ChatGPT, and created a video, used a lot of automatic image generation, so the Bach portrait speaks to us and everything. It's kind of fun and like, but it's kind of boring if you're not into this thing, because the guy actually shows what he's tried, which prompts and things like that. So I couldn't, I have to sit through the 15 minutes, but I loved it.
Yeah, because Bach is really interesting since a lot of the Baroque period is based in mathematical formulation, or even like motifs are very mathematical, or the way that you separate different harmonies. So I wonder if that has to do with anything, or if you like trade romance or like a romance era person, or I don't know. Very fun.
Yeah.
Great. So can we interact with the world? So here they're trying to posit that can it do a Google search, read an article, and give you current events? It's asking about who is the current president of the United States. Models really struggles with symbolic or operations such as deriving square roots of two large numbers. Or whoa, hang on, that's a bad note. Great. Yeah, so this is demonstrating multiple tools in combination. So it's able to understand the task at hand, identify the tools needed, and then use them in correct order. So here it is asking who is the president of the United States, then calculate the square root of a number, and then find the 13th letter of a specific word. So 3 very different tasks, and it is able to understand which of the tasks is at hand, whether or not it's a search engine result, a computation, or a derivation. But it is also able to do it within order. And so they finally had evidence of this using this example, but they give a connotation where the model had trouble using unusual tools, such as like a Wolfram calculator or something other or more lengthy than a square root, such as like a complex integral, or doing something that might require non-basic notation. But it is able to use multiple tools in combination, which is doing multiple tasks at the same time, or iteratively in an ensemble method. It is able to navigate a map. This was quite interesting. It was able to find sort of where each of these nodes were on a map, its weights, and then navigate it correctly. So it understood where the dead ends were on this map, going from one point to the other. And then it could also describe the map in different modalities. I didn't get into this example as much, but this is sort of like a pathfinding algorithm that I was able to utilize. kind of reminded me of the Minnie Mouse or like the small mouse robot exercise in Japan that they always host. But this is just a very interesting sort of reasoning and at least local representation of what a correct path might be. Then real world problems. They were trying to assist a human fixing a physical problem. So one where the computer does not necessarily have input on a physical example or the use of sensory other than descriptions of the actual physical problem. So the authors of the paper served as a human surrogate and the model assisting in helping identify the potential fix leak in their kitchen. The interaction went well, but the team does acknowledge that they did very few real world scenarios, which kind of implies to me they tried a bunch and they only included a couple. But they did not draw confident conclusions on the model's effectiveness in trying to debug physical real world problems. So for example, if I need to go fix my carburetor, it might give a good article or place for it, but it's not necessarily going to help me in my specific case with my Honda Accord and a loose gasket. Interactions with humans, theory of mind. This is where we start getting into the idea of the global workspace theory. This is the ability to attribute mental states such as beliefs, emotions, desires, intentions, and knowledge on oneself and others, so higher order reasoning, and how they affect behavior and communication. So it's not only that it can communicate in natural language, it has intention behind the communication. So the team here creates a series of tests to evaluate this capacity with different scenarios. They do conclude there's some advanced theory of mind where different actions might impact their mental state, especially more realistic examples. So for here, it's asking for different states. Yeah, it's asking for different states or monetary values, types of individuals that do not belong in the category. List these personal identification informations as a Python list. So it's doing many different tasks and trying to look at the ability to prompt any kind of specific information, gleaning out other information. So does this information pertain to this particular prompt, or is it filtering based off of the heuristics of the actual prompt itself? So it's actually doing a form of filtering, and they've identified that the model's discriminated capabilities to identify this personal identifying information is used as a benefit to de-identify potential users within the pre-trained data. All that's to say is that there is filtering happening. Is it good whether or not it is like information that we should see or not? That's to be determined, as a lot of their secret sauces, the ability to discern what is good information, what's bad information.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
So you said that this shows that there's intent behind it?
Intent is in an abstract way. So it's a filter based off of information to de-identify personal information. They don't give a great explanation on sort of the reasons why it's in the reinforcement learning layer for human, or for it's that last layer of the actual LLM where they're using human instructions to retrain, or human examples to retrain to get rid of adversarial examples such as like harmful examples. This is also to do with de-identifying humans as well. And so it's trying to filter out information like name or like a street address, or like if you're asking for 3 different individuals with specific information, you don't want to be able to backtrace and find a model of that person. So if I have all the model from Facebook, for example, can I find all the users who have blue houses in the Delaware or in Delaware? That might be able to identify other people if I also have sex, age, potential name, address. And so I guess they're trying to not give all information when prompted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not understanding how this shows an intent. I don't know what they defined an intent, but this doesn't show me that there is an intent behind this, right?
Yes,
If
I think
intent doesn't have an intent, it's designed to filter.
perhaps intent is not the correct word here, but it's rather trying to discriminate to specifically keep personal identification information private. So
can I like totally random interjection and
sure.
interrupt? There is a sci-fi story from the 60s or 60s dash 80s where a psychologist studying rats is getting abducted by aliens, and they're basically do exactly the same experiments on that psychologist, and he understands them but is unable to do anything but follow because doesn't like to be electroshocked. And so, and like, it's a very interesting of, okay, well, how would you convey the intent to the external observer who doesn't believe you are able to have an intent? Who wrote that? Just, it's a vague memory from whatever I read in high school. It's just, I'm not sure.
That's great. No, yeah, this is fun.
That's great.
Yeah, Ashkin, I don't know if that clears up your question or not. The team does acknowledge I mean, this is very speculative, and they do make a lot of claims, especially since this is their big press release for this tool.
It's for money mostly. But yeah, I think I get it. I still I do not understand, because others have mentioned about that there's intent behind this. I just do not understand. Do they change the definition of intent? How do you even see if something has intent or not? I searched for it once and there is no answer really. So
yeah, intent I think here is more discretionary on personal information or personal identified information, or PII as they're calling it. Team does acknowledge that they weren't comprehensive with this testing, since they were really trying to find non-textual clues that aren't there that it's trying to discern from. I'm a little unsure about that, but I can always go back and look at that section. I know this one was a little thicker than most.
So the idea is that it seems to have a goal, whether that was programmed or not.
Yes, yes. In the fact that it is trying to interpolate what information should actually be going to the user without giving it all information or trying to overwhelm it with too much information. Great. So let's talk about some limitations. The biggest limitation that this team really produces is that it does not have an inner dialogue. Having an inner dialogue would help the model to perform a multi-step computation and store intermediate results in coming up with the correct answer. So really, if you look at the first question to a human, the human might be able to count in their head and ask for scratch paper to list out the numbers before answering. This Microsoft team tested the model with even simpler scenarios, such as basic addition, and then the model failed. It would only work if you asked it explicitly to solve the equation, writing the intermediate steps. The team also argued the model lacks planning in text generation. They had a couple of examples here. The models seem to be really good at planning if the text is close to each other. So more like a local training of these models in an abstract form. But if the text is far away, in terms of like being about Clifford the big red dog, and then some quantum computational theory, the text is the model starts to fail. We can see that a little bit further here, where we get societal influences. We all know about hallucinations. This is a riddle example, and really is trying to go over different implicit biases based off of some hallucinations that it has, or misgivings and manipulation of misinformation from information it gleaned from the pile. But specifically here, they're trying to demonstrate implicit bias as since the internet is riddled with bias, this model is likely displaying the bias of specifically some of the, I don't know, married, divorced. You have boy's grandfather, young parent. All of these have different connotations that might have implicit bias based off of the pre-trained data. And so really the commentary is riddled with some, or actually a lot of biases, especially when it's trying to give this information. So that being said, the model is sometimes able to explain why it's biased or provide multiple answers to a question it suspects might be biased. So these societal influences do play a major part in the LLMs. This is a quote that I pulled from the paper. Really comes down to they're trying to demonstrate as much as they can as this giant press release comes out. I think there was like 30 authors on this paper, and they were really trying to make this all-encompassing as a first sign to show any kinds of sparks of AGI, or just start to get that word or that buzzword into the zeitgeist. But this paper is now cited 579 times as this morning, so people are paying attention. Big conclusion is essentially, yeah. Big conclusion is this is preliminary work. They're really trying to gain more understanding, especially as these models get bigger and they train for longer. My biggest concern is the intermediate steps, or how do you potentially gain better insight in having some larger computations, but that also presents a wide variety of other problems. Great. How do we then blend this into theoretical computer science, or even this global workspace theory? The original authors, Barr, who proposed the global workspace theory, described conscious awareness as though a theater analogy, where the activity of the actor in play is performing on a stage for working memory, and their performance is being observed by a large audience of unconscious processors in the dark. Once the actor is playing in this stage, it will utilize a lot of these unconscious players, and the energy and focus of these unconscious players will then be directed towards the task of the actor. That is an analogy they like to use, but this introduction to a conscious Turing machine is the way that they like to propose this, where this top figure A is their graphical example. It is the model that they study theoretical computer science for consciousness. It is intentionally simple, not as a direct model. The brain has taken inspiration from neuroscience and psychology, but the model defines conscious awareness in the feeling of consciousness in the way that are believed to be mirror general understandings of these concepts. So essentially, where they have this bottom-up attentional architecture with all of your sensory, vision, and experiences, these will get conglomerated into some kind of conscious event that happens from a central executive role. So this actor here is starting to play, whereas the bottom attentional capture are the audience members finally paying attention, where this event of the stage comes into play. Working memory then starts to come into effect as the actor plays on, and then you get sort of the way that the play might go out and the action than going throughput. Great. So it is really, they start to go through formal mathematical representation. I didn't want to go through this, as I hope to have time for a little discussion, but the going through that analogy. So unlike so there are parallels here with the original global workspace model. However, significant differences exist, especially within the architecture, how the data moves, and the role of consciousness. Whereas this conscious Turing machine is more trying to understand the differences between local memory and global memory, or short-term memory versus long-term memory. They didn't give a great definition between the two. However, it's trying to shoehorn this Turing machine idea where there's a tape, a read, a write. And unlike a regular Turing machine, the CTM's distinctness is the global workspace architecture, where it's a predictive dynamic, which is unique interlanguage, brain-ish, or some other like long-term memory recorder. So they're saying that there's some kind of long-term memory interacting, being able to direct or utilize past information to advance information or advance the tape. Great. Thinking about the features of all of these, and this is more just for completeness sake, we don't have to get into all of these. Essentially, they describe each of these different pieces. A lot of these have great arguments for global workspace environment. However, the one that is kind of interesting is that there's a lot of computation, and there's a lot of different ways to try to model this in different brain states or tests or psychological experiments. And so is this actually sufficient for deep learning? Is it going to be intractable? More than likely, especially at the current theoretical stage. But they were trying to link sort of this global workspace where there's an intention behind unused processes to then coordinate an action, which is their idea of what consciousness might be. Is this underlying use of an actor utilizing unutilized processes? Great. So that is more in the identity of trying to think about processors for consciousness rather than sort of a iterative process.
So go back a little. So that CTM, it says, for example, a noise is read only. That essentially means that we do not output any information using, for example, our nose, for example. That's really simplistic, right?
It is super simplistic, but they do argue that they want to start more simple than adding external output or external input to change the environment as well. I believe their model is making the assumption that the world is static at time of processing.
But that doesn't match up with the dynamics that they want. A dynamic system has to be open, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I'm not quite sure on those details, but I could get back to you. That is a fair point. Yes. In terms of time, I do have several slides about plant consciousness. Big concern is, are we actually considering plants to be conscious by what definition? A lot of times we are animal-centric, where we have to have some central node, like a brain, that is doing a majority of the processing. Plant physiology does not warrant any kind of central processing unit. And so it really, the evolution of consciousness doesn't just inclusively include vertebrates or humans. There are also other different forms of intelligence, like we have octopus. There are different ways of defining how insects potentially move and operate. And so the classical version of consciousness is derived from cognition and locomotion. Typically, these plant scientists try to argue against that, as there are a myriad of ways to define what might be complex behaviors and potentially interactions. And so this has been established in 2006, is that when this field serendipitously started. But what they are trying to do is argue these 10 different pieces to the puzzle on why plants actually might be conscious. And this is from an integration or information integration theory. So can multiple informations suffice together to create a conscious abstraction? So for example, can many millions of neurons actually coordinate together and create some of these abstractions? And so when thinking about sort of these different plant cognition behaviors, communication, there are plenty of examples of roots interacting neurochemically, hair-like structures with vibrations made by different responses to caterpillars and bugs with certain toxins that need to be released. For example, Venus flytraps release a certain chemical and then have a motor mechanism to close on contact after a specific time. Additionally, kin recognition. Plants do have the ability to recognize and discriminate certain plants from each other, whether it be by roots, chemically, or even interaction with branches, as many times branches will spin at a slower time scale than we can observe. Photoreceptors are also a way for recognition. They have decision making, whether or not certain plants will start to grow roots, if they need to germinate, if they need to produce flowers, depending on the heat, the day of light cycle, anticipatory behavior with the day and light cycle, learning and memory. They do show signs over courses of a year time scale. Foraging and competition. We all know different levels of the rainforest have different levels of competition. It's survival of the fittest, who gets the most sun. Different canopy levels have different ways of doing that. And you can look at the evolution of the canopies to just even see that there's competition in foraging. We also have microcilia, who ends up competing and evolving really rapidly as a fungal sort of plant. And especially this plays into game theory models for different predictive strategies with interactive competitive like interactions of competitive games. But this can be due to the soil resources and other light resources as well that they'd be competing against. Staying risk adverse, they'd like to stay near the nutrients. Based off of different experiments, they can maximize their fitness. Mimicry, they have adapted resemblance to other plants and entities. They give examples that I'm a little out of my knowledge of plants, but numerosity, various animals, including chicks and honeybees, have shown the estimate process of quantitative magnitudes, which means that they can discern different number amounts. So a chicken can discern the difference between a lot and a little, and bees, I believe, can understand the first 10 digits of or first 10 numbers. Those experiments are a little beyond me, so I apologize if I don't have great knowledge of that. But the last one is swarm intelligence, where we've seen, for example, different bees can swarm together. They can interact in sort of a group way of thinking. Plants can do the same thing. Ivy is a good example. Fungus is a good example. Trees, especially old forest trees, are great for swarm examples. And then plant neurobiology, I'm going to kind of gloss over this, as a lot of different plants have different neural mechanisms or neural-like mechanisms. So between their cellular structure, the molecular structure, their chemical structure, they do provide different levels of electrical stimulus. It's on a different order of magnitude than human interaction, but due to the chemical change with photosynthesis, there is a gradient that occurs throughout the plant. And so some electrical physiological recordings have actually been used to try to demonstrate a passage of information.
Can I interject just briefly on your first point there?
Yeah.
So we, with plants, we share about half of our DNA. Not too far diverged.
Yeah, that's a great point. However, is that a significant enough difference than like us and primates? Because isn't that difference only like 0.1% of difference between DNA?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
even
with
small-
primates, really small, but still, right? We attribute consciousness to primates, and
Yeah.
primates, mammals, we're kind of happy to do that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm just playing contrarian right now.
Oh, love it. I mean, me too.
The so the way I'll summarize the last of this paper with the ways that they actually think about the classification theories are really on cellular basis of consciousness, looking at sort of the different ways that photosynthesis might interact, how the chemicals might interact. Is there a passage, or can they track information through root systems or connected root systems? They have an information integration theory where they're trying to get all of these sensio-motor or types of input from the external world and find a process that it is trying to iteratively tell the plant whether or not to grow additional roots, or whether or not to grow a new leaf node, or if it's not going to be sunny for the rest of the winter to preserve energy and grow more roots. Or there's the non-reductive approach where the free energy principle sort of occurs and like in a predictive process happens. Yes.
You skip over the quantum-based approaches, and I think that's sort of a point I kind of want to call out on this whole presentation. Is basically like all the theory of consciousness that you mentioned are sort of implying that everything that's conscious is a classical computer, and
Yeah.
it seems like the one thing you just skipped over is the one that sort of like minority report of consciousness theories. Like, is there any quantum aspect of consciousness or any non-local aspects of consciousness?
Yeah, so sentience, so at least with this section, what I gleaned from the sentience is considered to be some sort of state of matter. In a reductionist theory might suggest that consciousness might be even explained at a quantum level. Penrose proposed that consciousness is tied to quantum mechanical properties of neural tissues. They call this sort of theory a orchestrated objective rendition model of consciousness, where they claim that sentience originates from a quantum computation through the collapse of quantum superpositions. So it is believed that really getting down to it, neural microtubules that behave as biological quantum computers. So with these microtubule quantum superposition collapses, it results in states of proto-consciousness where you either choose or not choose a specific action.
I will say
But-
Daniel is a philosopher that has a really good critique of that view.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Daniel
So-
basically responds directly to this view, and it's very compelling response.
Yeah. So it could apply to this theory of consciousness through this specific view. They say it might arise from quantum effects similarly hypothesized through pathways of photosynthesis or generation of new roots, for example. But there is some evidence that suggests they might have some quantum phenomenon linked to their vasculature. But this is still relatively new and very hard to study. But yeah, it is linked back to the Penrose sort of theories of quantum and microtubules. I'm not an expert in that field, so I won't claim any more than what I've just said. These are just part of my notes, so I apologize.
So I'm curious, what is differentiating the reductive from the non-reductive approaches here? What does that mean? What is that?
Yes,
distinction?
so free energy principle posits really that self-organizing systems must minimize the free energy to survive. So free energy really represents discrimination between expected and received sensory inputs. So if that's true, then a system should try to minimize the surprise of new inputs to avoid disintegration. And so here, what they're saying is if a plant needs more sun resources such as soil, space to grow, it's trying to minimize that effort, but then also will it be able to communicate? Did consciousness arise through just the need of those basic energy minimizing principles, rather than actually being like a collection of cellular or like a cellular basis or hemodynamical system that might help with integration of information, but rather just like self-emerging is sort of what it is. To your point, the differences between the two, I don't know really the nuances between the two, but that's
Yeah,
at least what the.
I don't really understand that distinction because it could still have a cellular basis while being sensitive to contextual factors. I mean, I don't know, that's just typically, I'm a little confused by that. Predictive process is discussed as a reductive approach a lot of the time, actually.
Yeah, that's fair. It might be more of a propensity to have emergent behavior using the free energy principle rather than finding the mechanisms and using them as building blocks to then create the process of integration itself. Does that make sense? So it's self-emerging rather than using, I don't know.
These self-emerging mechanisms though, right?
I know.
Explain anything.
But
Self-emerging, does it explain anything?
Yeah, that's.
I know. So I guess my last point on this is
in this context, it seems like.
yeah, because they specifically state that there are some plants that need to communicate to specific environmental factors. So understanding that a plant in the rainforest might differ than a plant in the desert mountain, where water might be, or resources of water might be scarce, so they stay dormant for 11 years before the rains. Like a silver sword plant, for example, in Hawaii, versus like a more tropical, like canna lily in the rainforest might need wet environments the whole time with natural sunlighting and shaded, diffuse light. That might be emerging properties, but I don't know how that would play necessarily here. This is still a very debated field. But I know we have about 8 minutes left. This is my last sort of slide, and I apologize for taking up 50-ish minutes just trying to go through the background. There's a bunch of different limitations to plant neuro or plant consciousness. There's a bunch of ethical debates about AGI prospect. I had some starting questions, but I wanted to pass it up to you all. Is there anything interesting that you sort of picked out? Is there differences between the two different theories that you would like argue for or against? Is not having a centralized unit actually give you the ability to become conscious? I don't know. So I'll pass it off to you guys for what might be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, anyone?
If plants are conscious, what does that imply? Maybe we go sci-fi with this.
They're really not.
You don't think plants are conscious?
No, they're not conscious.
I disagree. The papers on, so mycorrhizal networks are the big ones that people used to talk about, big forest consciousness and stuff. I think it's highly conflated, the notion of consciousness. And the research is a little bit shaky as well. The one paper I've seen that actually investigates it claims to see like sort of electrochemical signals similar to action potentials being passed between mycorrhizal networks. It's one lab from the Alternative Computing Institute in England, and no one has replicated the results. So it's a little bit suspicious to me. But I mean, it's a little bit apples and oranges, right? We talked a little bit about the conflating of the term consciousness, and I think that's a huge problem when we're talking about these different systems that can exhibit sort of similar kinds of behaviors that we label as consciousness. I mean, I think we really carefully have to think about what we mean when we're asking what is consciousness, because I think we're asking too many questions with one term.
Yeah.
And it ends up creating a lot of problems and confusion. and misinformation as well to a degree. But I think the question, like you is pointed when you think about it. So large language models, which we have only one way of interacting with them currently, which is their linguistic output, right? And so do you evaluate the consciousness of an organism entirely based on its linguistic output? Do you analyze it entirely based on behavior? Do you have to look at brain states in order to say anything about consciousness and underlying neurological bases? I think there's so many ways to tear apart that problem. I think we really need to, I think that's the kind of interesting thing to me is, okay, how do we, ask this in a way that's actually really carefully scientific, and then but then you end up saying very little and people don't get excited about it, unfortunately, but.
Yeah, I mean, one of my primary questions is what is the use of attributing consciousness to plants? What kind of, what value do we get out of that? How does that contribute to our understanding of the world beyond, currently available theories, which are just rooted in biology? I mean, why do we feel compelled to extend that property to plants?
It seems like this is indicative of the word consciousness being problematic in and of itself, because there's this implicit thing. Once you attribute consciousness to something, it becomes a protected thing. So it's like people who are super don't want to disrupt the environment. If they attribute consciousness to plants, suddenly you have to protect forests and trees and everything else, which is probably good anyway. But on the flip side, if you don't attribute consciousness to something, it becomes something you can exploit. So this is the dark side. So the base there's probably a lot of people who don't want to attribute consciousness to machines because that allows them to continue to be our workers and slaves. And it's I don't know. I think the word itself is just almost political and religious in a way. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think consciousness as an experiential thing is almost purely a social term.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult because I can't even prove that any of you are conscious.
My point.
Experientially, it's impossible for Descartes all the way back.
Descartes.
Yeah, and actually,
Yeah.
I don't think that even I myself is conscious.
Yeah, it's impossible to prove that anyone is conscious at all. But the important thing is it's important for me to treat you all as conscious because that's how you live as a human in society. So in the same way, we treat animals as conscious because
So it's just a farce.
it's a social.
So without
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you take it all the way to the Cartesian conclusion, I mean, even Nietzsche pointed out, Descartes was wrong. You can't even be sure that you're thinking. You can't even be sure that you're the one thinking. All you can be sure of is that thinking is going on. But the absurdity of that, I think, kind of warrants taking a step back from it and thinking about it just in terms of I don't know, just from a likelihoodist approach or something. Is that really the most parsimonious explanation? That you're just this derelict, solitary conscious being in a world full of inert, that does not seem like the most parsimonious explanation.
Well, without waxing too much philosophy or getting into sort of the meta behind sort of abstraction, a lot of this is due to integration of information. And so to me, a lot of these theories are strictly trying to figure out how do either the brain, these plants, or anything are processing information, be it sensory, language, you name it. And so it's more
But they're not,
interaction.
we're not arguing, right? No one argues here that plants process information and act on the information that they get. Plants are computational system, very smart in that sense.
Yeah.
By all respect.
They're intelligent.
They are intelligent. They're solving very difficult computational tasks in the world. Chemically and very slow on our scales, but they do. And we do, and other animals.
I think that there's probably a good argument that they perform some computations.
Then I think that kind of creates the question of, do they need to be conscious by, whatever
Only
abstract,
computation.
do they need to be conscious by whatever abstract definitions in order for you to start to ask, whatever ethical questions? If you are gonna be okay, does a plant, do we extend empathy to plants because do they have whatever experience, even if it's not on a level that we, are fully relating to? do you
I
still?
feel like that just
do you
goes back to
apply-
the social
apply to
thing.
that?
Well, but the
Yeah.
problem with plants is like they may have experiences, but they may be like in a parallel world because their frame rate is half of our generation as for some of and then we will scientifically it's still very interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe the universe is full of life that is just like that with very very different frame rate. But it's impossible for us to communicate.
Once we get something that's higher frame rate than us, and then they start calling
And-
us not conscious.
No,
we're
but
gonna have
that's
some
the problem.
problems.
Well, like way higher frame rate that there is like no point to slow down and
Exactly,
to wait
yeah.
for this ant to make a step. It's just like
Yeah.
But then I feel like it's absurd, like just talking about the plant, because we ourselves, we humans ourselves, we do not have any ethical responsibilities for animals also that.
Well, I mean, that's only because
No,
socially.
I'm
we
just
believe
saying, that's what
yeah.
I'm saying. I mean, we guys are talking about plants. I mean, plants may be, they might be conscious or not, like, okay, that's another debate, but we know there are animals who are conscious, but we still treat them like something
Yeah,
else,
yeah.
and that's exactly like what we're doing with plants. So the point with TJ had here, that should we be having some responsibilities related to agriculture or production? Well,
What
they're
are-
still doing it for something else, and we know that they're conscious.
I think it's a mistake.
Then it's like, so what
we're
is the debate
conflicting
about?
social
We're making a huge
ethical
mistake.
and scientific.
We're thinking that like ethics is rooted in consciousness, and that's like a huge assumption, like ethics does not have to be rooted in consciousness,
Yeah.
right? I don't go around killing, like cutting down trees and burning forests, not because I feel sorry for the plants, but because I don't wanna make the world a worse place for us to live in. Like, and animals to live in, like things that are conscious, so it's not that I care
So it is
that
still
like
based on
plants, like I think like plants are conscious.
It's still
so
about
I
social,
shouldn't-
it's still a social issue. I don't think, yeah, they might be conscious. I believe that they're conscious, but yeah, it's all, I still think it's all because of the social.
I mean,
peer
we've
pressure that going on.
done horrible things to
Yeah.
people who are.
Exactly.
conscious, And so like, it all goes back to
Exactly.
that social definition.
But it's still worth saying, I mean, there's still ethics in how we treat animals, like any animal,
No,
even
maybe.
even animals that are
I
like
don't think so.
raised.
I don't think
for-
so. I mean, so they're like group of animals that you might have some empathy for, and you can consider some ethics for them, but there are definitely few groups of animals that you do not care about at all.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
back to science. Science is about measurable things. Let's talk about measurable things.
Yeah.
Let's define
Whatever
something that we
science
have. Otherwise, we're gonna keep going until next Messiah.
Yeah, I'm confused by the whole, it's a social issue thing. I don't think consciousness is a social, no, I think that it's something that happened before society really became a thing, was to recognize
Oh, thanks, TJ. Sorry with that.
other animals were conscious, right?
Yeah, I mean.
That
Yeah, so we will
happened,
stop the
still,
recording here.
relatively
And thanks everyone who listened to that.
Yeah,
We will
thank you.
continue arguing.